Welcome, everybody. This is Jason, and today we have a special guest. I'd like to welcome my friend Latmos, and he is going to present a workshop about Blender.
Thank you for those who are here on the workshop live. It's really great to see so many new faces, which we haven't seen on the server before, I believe. So, like Jason said, this workshop is going to be about Blender. I hope it's not going to be too much of a doozy because it's going to be a little bit theoretical. We're going to dive deep in the next part, but this is part one, which is a rundown of the program. So basically, I can show you here the table of contents, which we're going to see today. So we're going to start with some settings because there's a few adjustments that by default in Blender are not necessarily very optimized for beginner level users. Then we're going to do an overview of the interface, see some of the basics, introduce us to some of the recurring concepts of Blender, which might be a little bit different from other programs you might have used before. And we'll do some ending notes so we can have some Q&A or recommendations at the end of the workshop. Feel free to interrupt me at any time during the workshop, whether by voice chat or in the comment section. I mean the chat. I know I said there would be time for Q&A at the end of the workshop, but you can actually ask questions as you go. So really do not hesitate. So the small disclaimer, sorry, before we move forward, just a word on comparisons with other programs. So I know this sometimes is a discourse inside the community where people get a little bit heated over the programs that they use or they are accustomed to. So I might do some comparisons with mainly Milkshake 3D because that's the program that's been around in the Sims 2 community for quite some time now. And that comes from a place of me trying to compare how Milkshake 3D does things and how Blender differs. So you hopefully get the idea of what's happening in Blender. So the first part is setting everything up. I think we are all quite accustomed to this in the Sims 2 community. So if you have not started Blender yet, you can do it now. Hopefully, once you have the program installed and ready to go, you should have something like this. Doesn't matter if it's not the exact same version. This is the blank project which Blender ships with. Most people are probably familiar with it. So you have like 3 objects in the viewport, a cube, a camera, and a light. But right now we're not focusing on that. We're just going to go into the Edit menu at the top and click Preferences. So here we are going to do just some quick adjustments because I find that these are very helpful for people who are starting out to have has a safety net. So if you go into the Save and Load menu in the Preferences, you should have a menu which is called Save Versions. So each time you save in Blender, it creates a backup of your file and it names it with a suffix at the end of the file name with a number. So it replaces the file format of the Blender project file, but it's actually still the same thing. It just renames it. So that is your backup, and this is the number of versions that it's going to do before it stops, before it starts overwriting the files. So I actually recommend you crank up this number to 10 versions, which might seem a bit much. And of course, only do it if you have enough space on your hard drive, sorry, because 3D projects can sometimes take a little bit of space. But I find that 10 versions to begin with, while you are still learning all the things there is to learn about Blender, is a good amount of versions and backups to have on hand. Once you've done that, you don't have to click anything. It should auto-save automatically. Then you go to System, and here you can collapse all these parts. We don't need them. And in the Memory and Limits tab, you should have a Undo Steps option, which is, I believe, now in the most recent versions, defaulted to 128. The maximum number you can input here is 256. You can put a number in between the default value and the max value. Whatever number suits your needs should be fine. I actually sort of recommend you go to the max again while you are starting out. And if you have a potato computer, one might say, you can also here change the undo memory limits. So let's say you have 8 gigabytes of RAM. You can change this number from 0 to 4 if you want to limit the amount of space the undo steps can take inside your memory to 4 gigabytes. No, sorry, it's not 4, it's 4096. So 4096 is 4 gigabytes. So if you input this value, your undo steps are limited to this size and cannot grow further than that. So if you have more steps, it's still going to hard limit to this. By default, it's 0, which means there is no limit, which you can see in the tool tip here if you hover over the option. But yeah, so you can do sort of what you prefer, but I suggest you just crank up a little bit the undo steps so you have a little bit more of a safety net when you want to mass undo. And one final setting we're going to change, and this is for people who are working from a laptop, which I know sometimes it's the case. The keyboard and mouse tabs in the input section, you should potentially try, this is not a requirement, but it's something that you might want to test out and see if you're comfortable with. You might want to activate the emulate numpad and emulate 3-button mouse if you're using a trackpad, that is, which is going to, in the first case, emulate a numpad on your keyboard. So if you don't have that, this one is going to basically convert the 1, 2, 3, 4 up to 9 keys above your letters and will make them act as the numpad numbers, which is useful because Blender has lots of shortcuts with those numbers, sorry. And this one is emulate 3-button mouse. A lot of the camera controls in Blender are done using the track button, the middle button on your mouse. So it can be useful, but of course only activate these two once you've tested it out and see if you're comfortable with them. So now we're going to do a little bit of an overview of the interface. So the interface of Blender is quite complicated, and I think everyone knows that and is probably right about saying this. There's a lot of buttons everywhere, and we can quickly be a little bit overwhelmed with all the things that can be clicked. So we're going to try and do a quick overview of the main components of the UI. So in here, so you notice that I'm dragging these windows. You can do this and you can like activate some sort of snapping if you hold out Control and move around. That's how I'm doing this. But we're going to start with this panel here, which is called the outliner. This is where all the objects of your scene are listed. So you notice here we have a cube, a light, a camera, which I've talked about earlier, and these are reflected in the outliner in the exact same way. They are located inside a default collection folder, we can call this, and they are inside a scene. So this collection can be deleted. So we can, for example, take the 3 objects and put them directly inside the scene collection and then delete the collection, and they'll still be there. But the scene collection isn't actually a folder. It's the 3D scene we are seeing in the viewport. So it can't be deleted, but it's there, so you can have some representation of the hierarchy. So the outliner serves as a way to represent the hierarchy of the scene, but also the hierarchy between the objects themselves. Sorry, silly question. How do you make the grid visible? The grid can be activated here on this little icon, which is called the viewports overlays. And it should be able, you should have it here as an option, or you can just click the little blue button here. And when it's blue, it should have the grid displayed to you. As I was saying, the objects, the hierarchy is between the objects and the scene, the 3D world, but also the objects and what they contain. So objects in Blender are kind of like containers in a way. They have types, which, for example, here we have, in the default scene, we have 3 types of objects: a camera, a light, and a cube, as I've already said. But this is not just the names that they have. These are actually types that they inherit. You can see this by looking at the little icon next to their names, which determine which type of objects they are. If I create, I'll show you how to do this later, but if I create another cube inside the scene, you see that they have the exact same icon. That's because they're the same type. The cube is a mesh, and the camera is a camera, and the light is a lamp object. And so, as I was saying, they also inherit the hierarchy of they have other properties which they store inside themselves because they are containers. So for example, the cube has this little green thing inside of it, which is its child, sorry. But this is actually the data coming from the cube, which is the 3D shape that it has. You notice that when I click it, I automatically go in some other place in this other panel, which I'm going to talk about later. And this is because it's telling you where the information you are clicking on should be edited or can be viewed. In the case of the cube, there's nothing much to see. You notice that it has a UV map, for example, but it doesn't have shape, doesn't have vertex group, so it's not a very interesting object. But nonetheless, it still has this data, so it's displaying it to you. And you notice that attached to the geometry of the mesh, it has a material which can be viewed here. And this material is just called material. That's a default name, but I could call this cube, for example, and so now it has a material which shares the same name as the object. So that's one way you can sort of organize your materials. So anyway, so the outliner is really a representation of your file structure, not completely, because your file structure is stored in another panel, but it's a representation of what's actually in the scene and can be interacted with. A sort of important thing to know is that there's filters in the top right corner of the outliner panel. And these filters, and I'm talking mainly about these little icons in here because the things directly below it are not necessarily super interesting, at least for now. And these toggles, they can do a lot of things which you might know from like image editors, that you can like hide objects using the eye icon. But Blender has other types of ways to hide or show objects. So for example, the camera icon, if you disable it, it means that the object will be disabled for rendering. So rendering is everything to do with like animation and video, stuff that people do when they are trying to make movies and stuff like that. So it's not very useful for us Simster creators, but it might be useful if you are baking objects using the tattooer, which we mentioned previously before we entered the workshop. But yeah, the little camera basically means hide this object, but only when you are rendering. And this one is the exact opposite. It's telling Blender hide the object. So the icon, sorry, I'm going to describe it. It's a little computer. So it's saying hide this object, but only in the viewport, only when I'm editing. Once I'm going to start rendering, the object should be visible. The eye basically does the two things in one, and the cursor just means that the object can be selected or not. So you notice if I try to select the cube now that I've turned off the option, I can no longer select it. I'm really trying here, but yeah, it's not doing anything. So this is kind of like a lock in Photoshop, for example. So we're moving on to the properties panel now. So the properties panel is the thing that is right below the outliner. So I could stay here all night explaining to you everything there is to know about all these little panels. And I'm saying this very humbly because I don't know everything there is to say about them. I could like try to explain to you, but mainly what I want you to take away from this workshop about most of the options that are here are they are basically useless for us Sims 2 creators. At the end of the workshop, I'm going to give some recommendations if people want to seek out more Blender knowledge in a more general capacity, but for Sims 2 only purposes, most of these options are very non-interesting. So basically, all these ones here, the gray icon ones, the red icon one, all of these are really like they don't matter. They are relating to the scene, the 3D world the object is in, and stuff like that, which we are making mods for a game that already has a rendering engine. So we're not basing our mod based on what Blender is able to display to us. So these options have no impact whatsoever on the object we're going to export at the end of the day. You notice this little arrow here at the end of the icon lists. This is like a toggle for hiding or showing any of these icons. So I'm not necessarily going to recommend you to start filtering stuff, but if you are working on a project and you feel like there's too many buttons, definitely use this to mask some of the ones that are really useless. So like I said, all these ones we are not going to really worry about. So I'm just going to do this, and there's a lot less icons now, so that's good.
Keeping it clean. That's a
Yeah.
cool feature.
Yeah, the Blender UI is very flexible, and there's a whole reason. There's a lot of reasons as to the why, but there's a lot of features like this that sometimes are a little bit hidden. But yeah, you can disable all of these, and it's not going to change a lot of things for us. This little icon here is the object. So like I said, the object is usually a sort of container in Blender. I like to compare the way that objects and the data that they contain, the way that they intersect is very reminiscent of how how do I say this? How the cinegraph works in Sims 2. So in Sims 2, everything starts at the crest level, and then you go to like the shape, then you have the GMND, then you have the GMDC. Well, in Blender, it's sort of like that too, but everything starts at the object level, which is the upmost container which a single object can hold, and then it gets all the other stuff it is referencing inside of it. So everything is clean in there, and it basically lives inside this one single container. So when you click here on the orange little icon, you are basically treating information that is related to the container object, not necessarily the mesh, but just the container enveloping the mesh. Do you recommend disabling any of those for beginners? I don't necessarily recommend you for these ones. I don't necessarily recommend you disable them by default, because you might forget that you have done that at some point. But if you are opening a new object and you are saving a file on a separate folder, for example, and you want to declutter the UI, you can definitely go ahead and just like filter them out, and that way you can have less icons on the UI. But by default, meaning every time you open a new project in Blender, I wouldn't necessarily make that the default, because like I said, you might want to toggle it back on later. Is there another way to toggle the menus on the navigation bar? My Blender version is 2.8 and the little arrow pointing down doesn't appear to me. I'm not too familiar with 2.8. It's been a while since I've started, since I've left that version, but I'll look into it after the workshop and I'll definitely tell you in that moment. It's possible it's a new feature that doesn't exist for that version specifically. So that is for this little bit. Now, all the blue icons I'm not going to focus too much on because they are a little bit complicated, but for now, just retain the fact that these ones, the blue ones, they are all like adjustment layers in Photoshop. They basically are things that you attach to your object, so it does a few transformations on the object, but in a non-destructive way, meaning at any moment in time you can disable, toggle them, or like modify them, and the object will still be able to go back to its default state. So anything in here that you attach to your object, if it's not applied, it's still not technically part of the object. It's just something that is being attached to it. So like I said, for now, I'm going to also untoggle, hide them, because it's not really interesting at this moment in time. So you notice that we are only left with 3 icons now. And this should be pretty straightforward. So you have, like I said, the object, which is the container. Then you have data, which I also mentioned previously, but this is the most interesting panel for us Sims 2 creators, because this is where everything that we want to either import or export from or to the game is located. So you have the vertex groups, which is the bone assignments information. You have the shape keys, which is everything related to morphs and stuff like that. You have UV maps, which we can only export 2 of them for Sims 2 objects. And then color attributes, those we don't really worry about. Same thing for texture space. Remesh is a little bit complicated. We're not going to dive into it right now, but definitely sort of like bring up the geometry data if you want, because this one is actually pretty useful. I'm not going to explain why right now, because that's going to be a topic for part 2. But this is a very interesting tab because it basically lets us create custom normals, which might help us get better rendering results on the normals of our mesh. Let's leave it at that for now. And finally, the last icon is the material, which again, I've also mentioned previously. And this is where you attach a material to your object. And for those unaware, a material is basically a resource which tells your 3D object how it should be displayed. So obviously your texture goes in there. So this is where that information is going to be modified. I'm going to go back to this a little bit later. So for now, let's leave it at that. Just checking if I've talked about everything. Oh, right, the workspaces. So workspaces, the workspaces are the things that you are seeing at the topmost part of the window near the center. So right now we are in the layout workspace, which is the default first workspace. Blender comes with all these ones by default. I didn't create any myself. And these are pretty helpful for like doing very different things. So Blender is a very feature-heavy program.
I'm sorry, did you say you can create your own workspaces?
Yes, you can. I'm going to show you in a little bit something that might be a little bit funny for you, but yeah, just for now, you can have like, so layout is basically how can I say this? So Blender is very used for animation purposes, and in that regard, a layout workspace makes sense because you have all your objects and you are basically displaying them and putting them in different places in your scene. So that's what that workspace is sort of made for. Then modeling is for everything to do with, well, modeling directly on your mesh. You can see that when I switched, now I have my cube, which is displaying the vertices and the edges and the faces and everything like that. So this is sort of like the space where you mesh stuff. Then you have sculpting for doing like, well, sculpting with your object, which is a little bit better if you have a drawing tablet with you, but can still be interesting to do with the mouse, sorry. Then UV editing, which is self-explanatory, texture paint, which is also explanatory, pink soup. You have shading, which is the editor for all your materials, which is a little bit complicated, not going into that right now. Then animation, rendering, compositing, which is not really something we worry about. Geometry nodes, again, not something we're going to do. And scripting, because you can also program in Blender for some reason. But yeah, you can, this is where you would write like Python scripts and then try to run them to do some custom things if you want. And yes, as I mentioned, you can also create your own. So you can click the little plus icon, choose a starting template. So for example, I'm going to start out with the layout one. And as you see now, I have a custom one here, which I can sort of do with as I please. So you notice that in the first one, the default one, I've moved stuff around. In the layout one, it just recreated everything that I had, including the 3D viewport view from the beginning. one little thing that might be a little bit funny, I'm going to just import this from another file which I made earlier. So I made this little workspace earlier, which some of you might recognize.
Yeah, that's cool. You could create your own, like you could control, like in each different workspace it's going to save where you have each panel set up.
Yes. It sort of
That's
like,
cool.
yeah, it sort of like keeps everything in memory from whatever you're doing, how the panels are arranged, where you placed everything, so you can really customize your UI basically the way you want, yeah. So here, so for those who are not aware, this is a sort of reproduction, very quick reproduction of what milk shape looks like. So if I import a Suzanne here, Suzanne is a sort of mascot for Blender. So you notice that I have like 4 views. One is from the front, one from the left, one from the top, which is basically what Milkshape has going on. And then I have another one for free paneling where I can move freely. One thing that might be useful to know is if you do Control Space while your mouse is hovering over one of the sections, you can expand that section and basically work in detail mode, if you will. And you redo that again to go back to the default behavior. That was the interface. Is there any questions that you might have?
No, I mean, I'm just amazed that you can configure it. Most of the time, I just open it right out of the box and use it that way. But I didn't realize you could disable all of this crap that you really don't need to look at.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it easier to find what you're actually looking for.
Yeah. Blender is, like I was saying before, Blender is a very flexible program because it has to be, because it has this sort of philosophy of trying to be a one-size-fits-all in the 3D workspace, in the 3D industry, one might say. And because of that, it has so many features that it can't do without having this much flexibility. So some people like that, other people don't. It's really a matter of preference. But yeah, you can really go on in there and really do whatever you want. You can even like install themes if you don't like the dark space Blender has going on. You can change the color of the 3D world and stuff like that. So it's really detailed on that end.
And make it the OG Battleship Gray from 2.5.
Yeah, I believe that that theme was one of the ones that they kept. It's just no longer the default, if I'm not mistaken. So moving on from the interface, now we're going to the basics. So there's a lot of things here. So the first thing we're going to do is first I'm going to sort of like reset my Blender project. Yeah, so now we have like the default. Okay, so the 3D viewport. So the 3D viewport is this thing here in the middle. Well, in the middle left side. And I'm going to expand it for now since it's the only thing we're focusing on. And I'm going to bring up a few things. So just going to name them, not necessarily going into much detail about them, but basically here on this side, on the left side, which you saw me expand, which you saw me call, sorry, is the sidebar, which is a very unuseful name, one might say, especially when you are Google searching stuff about Blender. But this is the sidebar, it's the name of this panel, and you can bring it up using the N key. And this panel is going to give you a lot of information about like the thing that you are currently selecting. So if I select this cube, you have like the information of where it is in the world, which rotation it is, how big it is, which dimension it has. It's stuff like that. keep in mind that, like I said already, since Blender is a very complex program, very flexible and stuff like that, it has a quirk, which is sort of what I like to call a contextual meaning. So when we are in object mode, which you can see here that we are in, you can't like go in and change like vertices and edges right away. You have to switch to another mode and stuff like that. So the sidebar and most other panels, they are contextualized on the fact that we are currently in object mode. So when I select my object, it's giving me information about the whole object, about the container, which we talked about previously. If I switch to edit mode, suddenly, if I select a vertex, sorry, this same panel, the sidebar, is giving me information about the vertex which I've selected. It's no longer information about the object. It's about this specific vertex. If I select two vertices, it's now giving me information about the combination of the two, and so on and so forth. So it's Blender is a very contextual based program, and you really need to keep up with which mode you are in or which context you are in before you do anything, because you might get lost if you don't mind that aspect. So here you have information about the object, which because I returned to object mode. Then you have like information about the current tool that you are using, or like about the view, which is like sort of how you can see in the 3D space, which can also have its own parameters, and then animation. And on the left side of the 3D viewport, this is a panel which you can bring up using the T key. By default, it's already shown, but you can hide it if you want with T and bring it back with the same key. And this is the current tool that is being selected, or like, no, sorry, this is the tools that are at your disposal to do whatever you please with them. Again, if you switch to another mode, there's a whole lot of other things that appear because we are now in a different context and we can do lots of other stuff in this mode. But this is basically sort of like, yeah, your quick access to any of the tools that might be useful to you. Now I'm going to do a quick operation on my cube. I'm going to move it on the z-axis, and this is because I want to show you this little thing right here, which appeared when I did my action, and this is called a context window. Sorry. So by default, it is collapsed, which is a very bad design choice because it's a very useful window pop-up, and you totally need it to be expanded. So I really encourage you to just expand it. And this is giving you information about the operation that you just did. So in my case, I moved the cube, so it's giving me information about the movement that was done, and it's telling me that I moved the cube by this amount in meters, using the orientation of global and yada yada yada. So this is a very context-based window. It changes based on the action that you just did. So if I scale the cube, it's now going to give me information about the scaling that I did. If I rotate the cube, it's going to give me that information instead. If I go into edit mode and I just move the vertices that I have selected, it's going to give me information about that. So it's yeah, this window is very, very useful, and it changes constantly. So you really want to, if you have something to change about it, you need to do it right after you perform the action. So if I move the cube again, this is the moment that I want to adjust what I just did. If I want very precise placement, I need to go here, put the number that I want, and leave it at that, and then when I click away, it disappears. I missed how you went full screen to where you don't see the large menus. This is done with Control Space. So if you do it again, it changes. So actions, this is the moment you really want to pay attention because this is the most common stuff that we do in Blender. Camera control might feel intuitive, but a lot of like 3D programs do it in very different ways. One thing you need to know about Blender when you are moving the camera is that everything you do about camera movement specifically, and I'm talking about your perspective as the user moving the camera around in the viewport, not talking about this guy here, which is also called a camera, but this is a camera for animation purposes. The camera that you are controlling as the user of the program, everything you do with this camera is controlled using the middle button of the mouse, which is why it's so important to have one. So if you want to like rotate the camera, you just click the middle button and you can like move around like this. If you want to go up and down, you press Shift, and this is going to give you this. So you press Shift and you use the middle button. Like I said, you always use the middle button, so assume that I'm always saying that the middle button is required for these shortcuts. But yeah, if you press Shift and middle button and go up and down, you are moving up and down in the world. Then if you do Control, you are panning, so zooming in and out of your objects. And then Halt is a sort of like snapping, it's sort of snapping to a 2D view depending on the angle that you are moving in. So that one is not necessarily very used all the time, but it's still useful sometimes. But yeah, so middle button to rotate, Shift to go up and down, and then Control to zoom in, zoom out. One very useful shortcut that I usually like to remind people is if you do press Shift C, this is going to reset your view based on the objects that you currently have on your scene. So in my case, I have these 3 objects right now, which are visible. So when I press, let me do this, if I press Shift C, it's resetting my view based on these 3 objects. If I hide the camera and the lamp, for example, so now I only have the cube, and I do the same thing, it is now zooming on my cube because that's the only object visible on my scene. So it's zooming on this. If for some reason you want to do the exact same thing as I just did, zooming on the cube, but you still want to keep all the other objects visible, that is done by selecting your object and then pressing the comma key on your numpad. And that's going to zoom into your object. So very, very useful to reset your view on a specific object. And that works with any of the objects you selected. So if you selected 2 objects, that's going to zoom on those 2 objects. And then, like I said, Shift-C to reset the view on all the currently visible objects on your scene. So that's for camera controls, I think. One thing that might be useful for people, if you press 0, this is going to assume the position, the view position of the camera that Blender has going on. So in this case, we only have 1 camera, so it's going to default to that. I can't really remember right now the conditions for which a camera is chosen as the one when you use that shortcut, but yeah, when you press 0 on your numpad, you assume the view of the camera on your scene. Might be useful in most cases, since we are Sims 2 creators, not very useful. but still good to know. So selections are sort of kind of easy. I'm going to switch to edit mode here because it's easier to showcase this in this mode, but you can still do it in object mode. So selections are done very simply by using the left mouse button to just point to a certain part. So here you notice that I'm switching vertices by just clicking them. If you press Shift and do the exact same thing, you can select multiple. That's pretty standard. But one thing that is pretty cool to have in Blender is you can use the B key. And this is bringing this little tool, this one right here. And this is a box selection. So you can do this, and it's going to select multiple at the same time. So B like box for the box selection. And then you can also use the C short key, which is like circle. So C like circle, and this is the circle selection. Pretty obvious there, but yeah. So this allows you to select. One thing that is a little bit weird with this selection is that you cannot move the camera while you are in this mode, while you are using this selection. And if you want to deselect when you are doing this, you have to press Shift, and that deselects, or or you press the middle mouse button to deselect. So select with the left key, the left button, sorry. Deselect with the middle mouse button, or by pressing Shift and the left mouse button. And that's the selection. You can increase the radius of the selection by scrolling up and down with your wheel. And yeah, that gives you this this little circle which is getting bigger. So yeah, so that's the selection parts. And I think it's probably good right now like this. It's not much more complicated. And then we have move, scale, and rotate, which I've done previously. So these are pretty standard. So when you have an object selected, you can press J, like Gregory, sorry, for the accent. So you press J and you can move the object around once you've pressed that key. So J is for, it's like grab, right? So you grab the object and you can move it around. Then you have the R key to rotate the object. So that's, again, pretty standard. And finally, the last thing you can do as an operation, as a basic operation, is the S key, which allows you to scale the object up bigger or smaller. So you can scale it according to whatever you're doing. A few pointers on this. Blender has this, what I find a very cool feature, where if you start your selection at the very center of your object, it has the influence of your operation is quicker. So you can do things a little bit quicker. Sometimes this might get in your way, but to each their own, right? But yeah, you can do this like that. It's very useful to move vertices around in a more precise way than it is moving objects around directly. But another thing that it's cool about Blender is that once you've reached the corner of the viewport, you can actually keep going, and it's going to let you basically go around indefinitely. So you're not limited by the size of the viewport. I find this very useful because in other programs it is limited to that part, but you can keep going and it's still going to let you do it. Quick note, if you once you are doing an operation like this, if you're moving, scaling, or rotating, or any other kind of operation, you can actually click the right mouse key, and it's going to escape out of that operation, so it's going to cancel the operation. You can also do it with the actual escape key, which is pretty standard as well. So the thing that I just showed you about it going going beyond, sorry, the viewport, is works for scaling, but also works for like moving. So as you can see, my mouse just did a transition from one side of the screen to another. So of course the cube didn't do it because the cube is still moving on that part of the world. But yeah. And last thing about operations of movement, rotation, and scale is you can constrain the axis on which you are trying to move things around. So if you press the J key and then press the Z key, you are constraining it to only moving on the Z axis. Same thing with the X, and same thing with the Y key. Yeah, and same thing with the scale, or the scale using the X and stuff like that. So it's really useful to do these kinds of operations where you want sort of precise control. And then you might have a use case where you actually want to constrain to 2 axes, but not the third one. So the way you do that is you press your key, in this case I press J, and you shift and press the axis you wish to not constrain the object to. So if I only want to move this cube in the X and Z axis, I'm going to do Shift Y, and now I'm only constraining, and I'm only moving this cube in the 2 axes which I have not pressed the key for. So it can't move in the Y axis. You notice it's going bonkers here. I mean, it's not going bonkers. It's doing what we said it's doing. So it's actually like moving away in the Z axis. That's why it's getting so small. But yeah, so that's how you do it. Happens a little less often, but still happens pretty commonly, I'd say. Any questions on those parts? This is maybe the part that is a little bit difficult to follow.
No, I mean that's clear. It's just again, I learned it the old school way, and the hotkeys have changed.
I see. Well, I'm sure there's probably like stuff you can change, switch around in the preferences, and then key maps. In this panel, you can like reassign a whole lot of shortcuts if that's something that you are interested in looking into. You can really like go in there and like search by name or search by keybind, and then do a whole search in the entire program, and you might have one of the shortcuts and change it there if you want. I personally kind of like these shortcuts, but then again, I started with 2.8, so these were the default ones already at that time. I wish I had known about the B shortcut earlier. Yeah. The B shortcut is definitely one of the most useful selection techniques, especially when you are doing UV mapping, because then you can like select a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. So how do I spawn a new cube? This is pretty easy. You do Shift A, which is bringing the Add contextual menu, and then you go into Mesh and select Cube. And there you go. You have a cube. Okay, so moving on from that, we're going to focus on materials now. So materials. Like I said, this is the panel. I mean the tab on the panel on the properties panel, which belongs to the materials part. I'm going to expand it a little bit because this one gets pretty complicated pretty quickly because there's a lot of things you can change about those. Materials are a whole thing. I'm not going to explain everything right now, especially because when it comes to Sims 2, the only thing you need to know about materials is that they are useful for previewing what might happen with your object once it gets imported into the game. But other than that, it doesn't really do much for us Sims 2 creators because none of the stuff that you change here is going to, again, be exported with the object. Only the thing that is in this section gets exported, like I said previously. So materials is really just so you can like import a quick texture and have your Sims 2 object look the way it's supposed to in game. So for a quick thought experiment, I'm going to just like import a quick texture here, nothing fancy. I think I might have something in this folder. Yeah, I'm going to put my wallpaper here. And you are not seeing anything, and this is because we are in the solid shading mode, which does not display textures. Its whole purpose is to be very lightweight on your computer, because displaying textures and stuff is pretty demanding for, I mean, some configurations, obviously, not every single time. But if you want to see the texture, you have to switch to this other shading mode, which is the material preview. Now my cube has my super cool wallpaper of space and earth, and it doesn't look pixelated at all. I wish. So yeah, that's how you import a texture. And another thing that might be useful for us Sims 2 creators to change as a default value is the roughness and IOR parameters. So the roughness defines how rough your object is. So if you crank the values all the way to 0, it's super reflective. Basically like a mirror, not completely, but almost. Very, very reflective. If you crank it up to 1, it's not reflective at all. But it's still sort of, how do I say this? It still reflects light. You can see if I move around, you see that there's some shadowing effects doing in this. But the roughness basically controls how the light should disperse across the object. So if you crank the value all the way up to 1, it's going to be a very reflective, the smoothness of your object is going to be very, no, sorry, the reflection of the light on your objects is going to be very, very, very smooth, which doesn't really happen in real life. This is sort of a cheat code that people that do 3D have using Blender. This thing is not something that is based on how light disperses on objects, which is not necessarily very interesting, but just so you know, if you are trying to base your object on like real stuff, this is not really something you should be messing with, just for the record. You can put this at the default value by hovering over the field and pressing the backspace key. This is putting it back to the default. And this specific shortcut that I just mentioned, the thing that puts this at the default value, works almost always on all fields of this same type on the entire Blender program. To add a new texture, you create a new material, you click New. So this is going to create a material, which right now is just called 001. I'm going to call it with your username. And the way you display a texture is you go here in this little yellow icon, and you click Image Texture, and then you go click and go find your texture. If you don't see the texture applied to your cube, you need to switch to Material Preview mode in here, because by default Blender is displaying the object without any kind of material to save resources. So okay, now we have this cube, and like I said, roughness isn't necessarily the way to go if you want realistic stuff. The IOR is actually what Sims2 calls the specular maps. So this is how reflective in terms of like color of light your object is. So if it's a metallic object, you should crank this value quite a bit, because that's how it gets this little sheen everywhere on the object. You can of course do more than that, but that's going a bit very far with it. But yeah, if you don't want your object to like shine whatsoever, if you have something that is very matte, for example, if you're working on a clothing project or a skin tone project, you can put this value at 1, and that just tells Blender, my object isn't reflective at all, so don't try to reflect any light. Do not go all the way up to 0, because then your object loses all information, because it basically becomes a object that cannot receive light, which again is not something that is based in reality, but is an option. So 1 is the value that you want to use if your object doesn't shine at all. And yeah, that should be it. A quick note on materials: if you do alpha stuff in Blender, you actually want to put this little settings here, render method, in the settings tab. Under surface, you have the render method option, and you want to change this from dittered to blended, because Blender uses a more modern, more current modern algorithm to calculate how transparency overlaps, which isn't what Sims2 uses, because it's a 20-year-old game, and you need to switch it to blended. Blended is the exact same thing as the option that you get in Sims2 alpha mode, and you set it to blend mode. It's the same thing. So if you're working on like hairs or like clothes that have alpha layers, you want to put this setting into this specific option. Any questions? I'm really like trying to go do a quick overview on materials, because it should have a workshop of its own. They can get pretty complicated.
No, clear so far.
Okay. So yeah, origin points. This is a pretty quick thing. So origin points. Every object you have in a scene has an origin, which means it's the center of your object. Right now the cube is placed, as you can see, half above the ground and half below ground. I mean, saying this because obviously the grid is the floor plan of the 3D scene. So the cube is halfway above and halfway below. This is because when it was inserted into the scene, Blender defaulted its origin point to the center of the volume, which is the center of the cube. This origin point is the point of reference for everything you import into the scene. Meaning, if you import a Sims model, for example, into the actually, I can show it to you, maybe. No, maybe not now. But if you import a model from the game into Blender, it's going to have this origin point set at the what we call the world origin. So the world origin is where the 3 axes meet, but this origin is not necessarily always in this exact area. I can, for example, show you if I do this. If I do this, yeah, this, you see that my little cursor here, this thing, has changed positions. I did that using the shift and right mouse button, sorry. So that changes the position of the cursor. That's called the cursor. So if I put it here and then I tell the object to now have its origin at the position of the cursor, so I do that by going into Object, Set Origin, and then Origin to 3D Cursor, you see that the little dot, the little orange dot, has now shifted into this part, which means that if I want to control my object, it now moves based on that point. It rotates around that part. When I move it, it moves according to that point. If I scale it, again, it moves based on that. So it's really like the origin point is the place where your object lives inside the world. And that might not always correspond to where your object is. In the case of Sims 2 objects, sometimes you might have some objects that are offset proportional to the origin. Because, for example, fences, they always get offsetted by a few meters, or like if you have objects with multiple footprints, they also get offsetted slightly. So the origin is something that you need to keep in mind. However, most objects that you will import from Sims 2, they always will have this little point at the center, at the world origin. Because that's just how video games used to work. They always place that point at the center, so that way when the object is in the game, they can base the position of the object based on that. But the object itself might be offsetted because, again, the origin of the how do you say it? The origin of the object is not necessarily the center of the object. So yeah, so that's something that maybe you don't understand right now because like it takes a minute before you understand like how the math is mathing in terms of how you position this in the 3D scene, but you will get used to it eventually. Maybe after you've messed up a few times, because yeah, that tends to happen. But yeah, if you want to set the to reset the origin, you can press Shift C, which is going to replace the cursor at the center of the world origin, and then you redo the exact same step where you go Object, Set Origin, Origin to 3D Cursor, and that's you need to have the object selected, and then that's going to move the origin back to the middle of the cube in this case, and now I can move it how I want. Hopefully that was clear. Any questions?
This is something I struggle with in Milkshape sometimes because like I want to rotate something and I rotate it like according to the origin and then the center of mass, and I have to try it like 4 times before I get it right. But that's a me problem, I think.
No, I see what you mean, and yeah, definitely, this is one of the things that sometimes people get confused very quickly in Blender when they come from Milkshape, it's because the world origin is here, right? And then the origin of the objects is at the center of the mass of the cube, which, okay, right now makes sense. But in Milkshape, you don't have the concept of object mode. So when you move the cube, it's moving with its point of its origin, right? Like the little middle dot, the orange dot is moving with the object. This is because we are moving the whole object in the 3D space. But another thing you can do is switch to edit mode, then move the cube. But in this case, the origin stayed in place. It's still in the world origin, while the cube, the actual place of the geometry, not the object, has shifted from the world origin. So now if you move the cube, again, it's going to move according to that point. Okay, so I'm going to move on from this section and getting into the recurring concepts. So this is more specifically stuff that Blender does that other 3D projects don't necessarily tackle in the exact same way. And these are concepts that are very commonly discussed amongst people that use Blender regularly. So the first thing, which I've already talked about, is object and edit mode. So to explain it in layman's terms, object mode is more so something that animators are interested in, because it's stuff related to how the objects in the scene relate to each other, not necessarily how they are constructed in their inner selves. Objects can be very close together, but they are not like the same object, right? But you think like in films, like I don't know, 3D films, when things move in the scene, they are actually clearly moving, like they are moving like this, right? Like when you see a character walk, they actually walk the line like this. So object mode is really to move whole objects as a whole, as a container. So you can change like the shape of the object unless you are using like modifiers, but that's another case scenario. So if you actually want to control the shape of the object, you need to switch to edit mode. In edit mode, I'm going to go back to solid shading mode. So we have like a more visual representation of what's going on. So in edit mode, sorry, you get all the standard things that a 3D software would show you. So you have all the points, all the vertices of an object are available to you. You can select them, you can move them. You can also like select two of them and then scale them according to the x axis. This is going to do something like this. Then you can like select this one and constrain into the z axis, and then it's going to do something like this. So this is where you change the shape of your object. It's edit mode. And how could I say this? So you change things here, but again, in object mode, it's still in the exact same place. Like, okay, the shape change, and so it's sort of like the dimensions of the object change. You can see here that the dimensions are no longer 2, 2, 2 like they were before, but the cube actually has changed its shape. So yeah, object mode is for the objects themselves, and then edit mode for changing the shape of them. If you want to switch from changing and editing vertices to changing like edges or faces, you click either the 1, 2, 3 digits on your keyboard, sorry, but the ones that are above the alphabet, not the ones that are on the numpad, but the ones that are above the alphabet. If you are working on a laptop and you enabled the emulate numpad feature. You might notice that it's not working as you intended, because it's going to use what the 1, 2, 3 of the numpad are doing, which is like changing perspective in 2D. So if you want to do this using just a normal UI element instead of like a shortcut, you can do it right here. So you have vertices, edges, and faces, and when you switch them in these little buttons, you can access those features. So now I am selecting faces. I select this one, which looks totally awkward, but yeah, and I can do what I want. So this is basically selecting the 4 vertices with it. If I just want edges, I can do this as well. Selecting edges now, and then finally back to vertices, where I can do these sort of things. So that's how you select those 3 things in edit mode. Moving on to the 3D viewport options. So the 3D viewport tools are pretty interesting and pretty useful to do. And to do this, I am going to demonstrate it with a cube, because again, a very basic object that can show us a lot of the basic stuff. So I am going to zoom in into the cube and just do this, for example. Okay, I'm going to delete. So this is an interesting case. I am in edit mode and I'm trying to select the camera, but I can't because I am in edit mode with the cube right now. So I need to move back to object mode if I want to delete the camera object. Either that or I right-click the camera and then press delete. But if I didn't want to do that, I could just press tab, and that's going to switch between object and edit mode quickly. So I can switch to object mode pressing tab, select the light key, delete it, and then go back to edit mode by selecting the cube and pressing tab again. That's how you do it a bit quickly. So the first thing we're going to see is X-ray mode. So X-ray mode is this little option right here. And this one is something that comes by default in Milkshake. But basically this feature lets you see the vertices and edges and faces that are like hidden by the current view of the object. So if I want to select this vertex, which is like a little bit farther away, I can do that with with the X-ray mode. If I have this, so I have basically 2 vertices, one on top of each other, I can't select them if I am not in in X-ray mode. I can only select one of them, because I can only select the one that I'm seeing, which right now seems to be this one. When they are perfectly aligned, Blender tends to sort of default to the one that it deems is the closest to the camera view, I believe. Maybe, not too sure, but not really important. So if I press the X-ray mode, now I can select both of them and then do something with them. So pretty important feature to have. And now I'm going to do a bunch of Control Z so I can undo that. So yeah, X-ray mode. X-ray mode is automatically turned on when you switch to the wireframe view, shading view, sorry. As you can see, it's automatically toggled on, so you can do your modifications. So wireframe view is just displaying the wireframe of the mesh, while the solid view is sort of like trying to make sense of the volumes in a 3D shape way. Then, moving on, here we have the overlays. The overlays are like pretty useful for things like, they are mostly useful in object mode because they can tell you a lot of information about your object. So for example, if I wanted to know how many polycounts this cube has, which is not a lot, I would toggle the statistics on And now it's showing me the statistics, sorry, of the object. So you see here the triangles, it's 12, so it's 12. The poly count of this cube is 12. 12 triangles. And then you can like do a lot of stuff. So you can like, for example, toggle on the floor parts. You can remove the 3D cursor, like general information and stuff like that. In edit mode, it's pretty useful for things to showing things like sharp edges or bevel edges or crease edges or seams when you are UV unwrapping. If you don't know what those are, it's okay. We'll probably mention them later on, maybe in part 2. You can also see, for example, the directions of the normals. So right now the vertex normals are like pointing in those directions, which seem pretty standard for a cube like this. You can also like display them for like edges or for faces. You can also like make them look like porcupines by doing this. So yeah. So that is like overlays are basically informations that you might want at some point, but not all the time. And that's how you display them. It's using this menu. Then you have viewports, sorry, so yeah, viewport overlay. So you have viewport, this is the statistics one, which I was mentioning, and this one is the one specifically for edit mode. And then you have the gizmos. So gizmos are not necessarily always very interesting, but one thing they are good for is if you toggle on these ones, move, rotate, and scale, you actually get a little gizmo when you start doing stuff. So you can actually control the edits that you do using this instead of using shortcuts. So you can, for example, move this in space using the arrows one, or scale it using, well, this one doesn't really do much, but if you select 2 vertices and then scale them, they are going to move like this. Or if you do this, they are going to rotate. And this one just rotates based on your current view as the user. So yeah, gizmos can be interesting. And especially if you, for example, instead of using the default, which is basically using this one, which we're going to talk a little bit later, you can change the gizmo to be displayed according to the normals. And now, for example, if I select my face here, now it's letting me change this part according to this specific angle, which is the way that the face is, well, facing, which can be useful on more complex objects. So those are the gizmos. And then the interesting stuff. So, okay, I was mentioning the orientations. So orientations are like the context of the sort of operation you're doing. So you can move, scale, rotate, and like basically edit stuff based on different types of orientations. So if you click these vertices and you move them, you are moving them according to the global space. If you constrain them to the z-axis, this is the z-axis of the global space being the scene or the 3D world. If I actually want to constrain this to the z-axis of the normals, of the average normal of these 2 vertices, I would go here and press normal, and now if I constrain it to the z-axis of the normals of those vertices, now you notice that they sort of go into a diagonal, which you can sort of like tell that these are looking up like this in the exact same direction, so they are going to move according to that. If I select these 4 here, now the average direction that they are facing is basically the y-axis. So if I do JZ, they are going to move like this. So orientation, very useful if you need different types of context for the orientation of your stuff. Then we are moving on to the pivot point. So pivot point basically is going to decide in edit mode, it decides based on which point you are doing your operations. So if I want to rotate this cube based on the world origin, right now it's at the center of the world origin, at the center of the cube, so it's just going to sort of like move like this and it's okay. But let's say I am going to put this in here. If I try to rotate it, it's not going to do the exact same thing that it did when we were in object mode and I was like sort of like moving the cursor around. It's still going to rotate based on the median point. But if I suddenly want to rotate this based on the 3D cursor, I just select that. And now it moves around based on that part. So for example, if I want to move my object according to this specific vertex, I can do this, then press Shift S, which is going to bring this contextual menu. And then I'm going to say cursor to selected. So I am selecting this vertex and I am going to move the cursor, this thing right here, to the selection. So now it's here. And now, since I am in pivot point 3D cursor, if I press R, nothing happens, of course. If I press R, that I have to have the whole thing selected, of course, it's going to rotate based on that part. So you can, for example, say I want to move it like this only on the z-axis, because the z-axis is the one going like this. So I'm going to rotate it according to the z-axis based on the placement of that specific vertex. You have other stuff that you can do. So for example, you can, for example, tell Blender that you want these to move in the specific directions of the normal. So showing you what I showed you previously, if I show you how where the normals are facing, if I select these two, they are going to move in that direction towards the top, right? Like in sort of a diagonal like this. But if I face them like this, you can see that it's not really going in a straight diagonal. It's sort of like going like each of them are going in their separate direction. If I select both of these and I go median point, and I try to change this based on the normal, and I go JZ, it's going to move according to this angle, right? Which is a straight angle, like I was saying, because I've selected these 2 points and the average normal direction of them is this specific motion, okay? Now, if I want them to follow their singular specific normal for each of the points that I've selected, I need to go into individual origins, and now if I do the exact same thing, they are going to move based on that direction, which is going slightly in the different parts. This is most notable using scaling most of the time. Right now, not so much. So yeah, so basically that's doing that, but on those 2 specific points. And then active elements, it moves them according to the one that is currently selected. So Blender has a sort of quirk with selection. So right now I've selected this one, and if I shift click this one, now this one is my active selection, is my active selected vertex, even though the other is still selected. So the active element is according to this one right now, and you can tell that because this one is white while the other is just orange. So if I want them to move in this direction together, then that's how I do it. And you see that it's going that way in sort of an offset kind of motion. So that's for the pivot point. It's pretty complex, and you'll see that you'll change this pretty much extensively all the time, because sometimes you want global, sometimes you want normal, sometimes you want cursor, sometimes you want the individual origins, etc., etc. So these are very useful features. Now, one thing that I've showed you previously, that I spoiled you, sorry, is snapping. So snapping is this little thing here, which you can toggle by just clicking the little icon here. And you can snap them based on a whole bunch of things. By default, it's increment, which means that it's incrementally just snapping to that. So if right now I have it turned on, if I move my point, it's snapping to increments of just increments. So it's going like 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, etc., and etc. You can snap to the grid, which is the grid that Blender is displaying to you, which is sort of the same thing as increment, but not always, because if I dezoom a lot, now it's sort of like snapping to the grid, but the grid has like become much bigger now. So it's going to snap according to that in all directions. If I go if I zoom in really close, now I can snap to the grid, but the grid is again sort of like this specific size. So the grid sort of changes how big it is. Like you can see that you have like subdivisions of the grid the more you zoom in, and the snapping mode onto grid actually accounts for that. So that's what it is. And then you have vertex, edges, faces, volume, which are basically the exact same thing. So vertex obviously snaps to another vertex. So here you can see that I can like sort of merge them, even though they are not really merged, they're just placed on top of each other. I can do it to the edge, so I can like move it to the edge right here. So anywhere along this specific edge, or this other specific edge, or anywhere snapping on the face of, like, I don't know, like this one right here, and there you go. So you can see that it's trying to snap to that. Obviously it's going to clip a lot, but that's the result of that. And then, so yeah, those are basically the most basic ones that you are probably going to use a lot. A useful thing to know is that you don't have to toggle this, actually, because you can just try to move or do something with your vertex and then press Control, and that's basically going to do the exact same thing. You see here it's snapping to increments because that's the one that I have selected right now. If I select vertex and then I do move and control, now it's going to try to snap to a vertex. This is very useful if you do a lot of I don't know, like shoe swaps or stuff like that, where you need another object to snap to a specific vertex. Sorry, that's how you would do it. And finally, one of the most useful features, which is actually the feature that made me want to switch to Blender a few years ago, is the proportional editing. So proportional editing is basically going to you're going to start at your selection. So right now I'm only selecting this vertex. And what it's going to do is, if I press the move shortcut, it's going to move it this way, right? So right now makes sense. But you notice this little circle in the middle, which is the radius of selection of the proportional editing. So if I increase this circle using the wheel button on my mouse, the other points of my cube are going to start moving with the one that I've selected. This is super useful when you want to make smooth movements or smooth transitions in between like one point and another. That's how you would go about doing that. And what's cool about it is that you can actually use different sort of shapes for it to go by. So let's just remove the cube for now, and let's put a Suzanne on the viewport. I'm going to put it to shade smooth so it looks a little bit more detailed, let's say. I'm going to remove the normals because we don't need them anymore. Let's say I want to make her here bigger for some reason. I'm going to select these vertices, which I can also just select by using the face here. And now I want to scale it, right? So right now it's going to scale it really big because my radius is super enormous. But if I just want this specific here, I can just do this and then scale it like that. So obviously it doesn't necessarily do a very good job, but I can like select more of this. If I feel like my initial selection wasn't very good, I can press Ctrl plus, and that's going to expand my selection, my initial selection. Or I can do the inverse of that and use Ctrl minus, and that's going to decrease the selection. So if I do this, so right now I have like all these faces selected. I'm going to deselect this one because I feel like that's a bit too much. And I'm going to scale this, and you see that the here is actually going to sort of going to scale in a smooth way. If I didn't have this selected, it would be very like jagged, right? Because only the ones that I've selected are changing. But with proportional editing, it's sort of trying to make a smooth transition between the ones that I've selected, which are going to sort of stay the same, and the ones that I haven't selected, which are going to, in a curve, which is this one here, go from a 0 to a 1 like this. And if I do other shapes, for example, a sphere is going to try to do this in a more circled out way, which depending on the object you are editing doesn't really look like much, but the inverse square, for example, is one that one that I find myself using quite a lot because it sort of tries to do the changes in a quick way. Like it tries to do the transition between my selection and the ones that weren't selected in a sort of quick way. And this one, the sharp one, it does it in a even more quicker way. So you see that it's still smooth, right? But you can certainly like see the difference when you are using the smooth one, where it sort of like tries to be a little bit more subtle about it. Whereas sharp really like takes that and like really tries to change a lot very, very quickly. The more you are close to the selection, it tries to really change your selection a lot right away. And the ones that are sort of forward, that are a little bit more spaced out from the selection, they get changed even less than the ones that are closer. So yeah, and you can also like choose random, and this is like sort of trying to go in a random way, which might be helpful sometimes, although I haven't really used it for anything right now, but there's probably use cases for it. So yeah, notice how this little context window is still popping up as I am doing all these different actions. This is one of the things where this window is really useful, because sometimes you want to test how the different curves are going to affect your selection. So you can, while the context window is still here, you can actually change the option that was used to make the proportional editing. So by default, it would be smooth. If you press Control and wheel inside the option, it's going to change from one to the other. And that's going to give the different results. You can also like change the proportional size that was used. So if you want the radius to be smaller or bigger than the one that you had initially, you can do that here. And yeah, you can change the orientation, you can change like the scale. Let's say I only wanted to move the X scale, but I wanted the Z scale in another way. So yeah, that's basically how you would go about doing that. Proportional editing. Very useful, for example, to change a short length skirt into a long length skirt. You'd be surprised how easy it is using this tool. Yeah. Believe me when I say that this specific feature is the sole reason I switched to Blender all those years ago from Milkshake. Okay, so the last feature is one very simple feature. I don't remember if Milkshake has this feature, but a lot of like 3D programs have this right nowadays, but it's the mirror feature. So if your object is identical on both sides, which this Suzanne mesh is, then when you activate this feature, it's going to let you edit both sides at the same time. A lot of objects and a lot of like clothes actually are symmetrical, and there are ways which I might like show you in part 2 to make things that are not quite symmetrical like exactly symmetrical. There are ways inside Blender where you can do that. And this is going to allow me to move on to the next portion of this part. If I wanted to make this thing exactly a copy with the other side, then what I could do, notice how when I imported the Suzanne mesh, it imported into the origin that was actually selected at that time, which wasn't the world origin, which would be here. That's the thing to note, is that when you Shift A and you insert an object using that, it's going to select the currently active origin point. So I'm going to delete this Suzanne because I actually want the world origin to be at the center. And I'm going to re-import Suzanne here. Okay. So as I was saying, so I am right now I activated X-ray mode and I am using the B key to select all the left vertices, and I'm going to delete them using the delete key. And you have all these little options. You can delete using the edges, using faces, only faces, etc. I'll let you like sort of discover what each of these ones do. They are pretty like self-explanatory, but sometimes you'd be surprised how the result goes. But basically, by selecting vertices, it's going to select only the vertices. So the faces that are here, which are not really selected, they are also going to be deleted. Because by deleting the vertex, you are deleting the face with it. Sometimes you would only want, for example, if I was selecting faces like this, all these faces, then what I would select would not be vertices, because if I select that, then it's also going to delete the middle vertices, because they are technically selected. But if I only wanted to delete the faces, then I would go delete faces, and that's something that happens. You notice that I missed a spot here. So I'm going to redo my selection here, there. Now it's selected. If I wanted to delete only the faces, but not the wireframe, then I would just go only faces, and that's going to let me keep the edges and the vertex. So yeah, so that's sort of a quick rundown of what those options can do. But right now I'm just going to delete the vertices. If I wanted to make a perfectly symmetrical Suzanne, I would select her, and one thing I could do is I would go into modifiers here, which, remember, these blue icons are the sort of adjustment layers of Blender. They are the things that you put into the object, but it's not part of the object until you have applied it. So if you add a modifier here and you click the little search bar and you type in mirror, then there's only one option, and this is going to put a modifier, and by default it's going to mirror on the x-axis, which is like 99% of the times that's what you want. And if you press this little one here, merge, it's going to merge the vertices that are collapsing onto each other. So that way when you apply, you don't get like double vertices on top of each other. And so now I have a perfectly symmetrical Suzanne. She was mirrored based on the world origin, which is here on the x-axis, right? But if I go into edit mode, you notice that only a part of the Suzanne is actually displaying a wireframe. And that's because, as I said it, this part of the Suzanne currently doesn't truly exist. It only exists because Blender is predicting what it's going to look like once you apply the modifier. So again, this is very useful because not having any of the mirror of the edit mode options enabled, I can just do what I want with this mesh here, just opening her head or whatever, and it's going to mirror that on the other part. This is not the same thing as this option because this is a modifier that has been applied to the mesh, while this is if I have a mesh that is symmetrical. For example, if I apply the modifier, then now these vertices exist, and if I press this option and do this, then it works because this mesh is perfectly symmetrical. So yeah, I think that was like a lot of things at once. I hope it was okay. Do you have any questions concerning that last bit?
Not a question really, but yes, that is, I can see how that would be extremely practical.
That was dense, but very primitive. Yeah, it was very dense.
Yeah, it's a lot, but I think what's cool is that we can go back and review it once the video is up.
If there's a specific tool you need to use, like you can watch that part of the video.
Yeah. It's the reason why I sort of wanted to do a rundown of the workshop as the part 1, because there's a lot of things that that you need to sort of understand how it works before you are ready to dabble into like Sims 2 stuff. And like this is only this sort of like the surface of what you can do, but yeah, so this way all of this I don't have to explain in part 2, and you'll see that it's going to be much quicker. Like the next part is going to be much quicker now that we have all of this sort of in mind.
No, I mean it's cool because then this is kind of like a general overview, and then next week's will be more specific to what we would use Blender for.
So ending notes. So if you didn't know, Blender is a free software. So it's not only free software, but it's also like open source. It's made by like a whole bunch of developers, has a team. They have been at it since the 2000s, I believe, maybe even before that, maybe like it released in the 90s. I can't quite remember right now. But they have a foundation, so if you can donate, if you like the program and you feel like it's very useful to you, so definitely donate if you can, because I don't know, I feel like it's a very useful program that and it's very cool that it's made like public and it's free and anyone can use it. I know a lot of people wouldn't have started 3D if it wasn't for Blender. And like I mentioned too, if you want multiple versions of Blender installed on your computer, you totally can. Even on the same user session, you can. I would recommend for Sims 2 purposes to keep within the range of like Blender 4 and Blender 5, but you can definitely use all kinds of like versions. In 2019, Blender had a very big overhaul. Anything that sort of predates version 2.8 is starting to get a little bit irrelevant, only because like people have like moved on and there's new features, the UI is different. There's a lot of things that broke between like the two versions. So definitely be aware of that. Like sometimes you're going to see a thread and it's going to be about Blender 2.3, you know, and you might not have like the exact same thing in the exact same place, but it's probably still there. And if you feel comfortable with a specific version, you don't need to update. You can just install the latest one alongside it.
I have a couple of comments on that. So if you go to Blender's download page, and this is me personally. I have I currently run 2.49, 2.79, and 4.4 just because I use them for different things. And I recommend the installers because then you don't or not the installers, but the directory versions, like the zip folders, because then you don't have to worry about installing and uninstalling and overriding your default settings. It depends what you're using it for. For example, I think most people are familiar with 2.79 because that's the go-to for putting the Sims 4 A pose into the Sims 2 T pose. All of the 4s are good for most of the 3s, and all of the 4s are good for Pollutings the Tattooer, but that currently doesn't support any of the 5 versions.
Yeah, it's definitely like the features are sort of like a mixed bag of things that work or don't work, and like a little bit of the beauty of Blender, but also some people don't like that. It's how there's a whole lot of like add-ons and extensions and stuff you can put into it, but then since they are made by the community, they are prone to sort of go out of date if the person that was making the tools doesn't update them for the latest versions of Blender. So yeah, the reason why I sort of like recommend sticking to like 4 to 5 ranges of updates for Blender is because what I'm going to show next part is the latest version of the Sims 2 GMDC plugin, which is maintained currently by Nupk, SimNupk, and they are the one which have like updated it to the latest version of Blender. The one that is on Mod The Sims is compatible with like Blender 2.8 through I believe 3.6 or something like that. And then at some point, Blender made a change into how they treated normals, and that broke the add-on. So yeah, so that's definitely something you need to keep in mind. And it's sort of the reason why I say if you like one version, then definitely stick to it and don't necessarily go and update every single time there's a new version. I had just a few recommendations in mind, just to give you some of them. So LoopTools is an extension which is available by default with Blender, but this extension needs to be turned on. So the way you do that is you go into Edit, then Preferences, and here you'll have like add-ons, and in this list of add-ons, you'll have like this one, LoopTools. So LoopTools is already there, is already shipped with Blender. It's just not turned on by default, so you can turn it on. And this is because it allows you to do a whole bunch of stuff in edit mode that is very, very useful. And those things are like aligning vertices in a row, but based on a specific axis, which is something that you don't do as easily just using other tools. You can like smooth a specific curvature on an edge using that. It's a very useful tool, and we might get more in deep with into it in the next part. But yeah, that's definitely one that you might want to turn on and basically just keep turned on and discovered as you go. There's a bunch of like tutorials online that you can watch that will just tell you what it does specifically. Then mesh repair tools is very useful if you want to sort of like clean up a mesh if it is like a little bit broken but not completely broken. Like it doesn't like do miracles, but it's still pretty useful to have on hand. That's an add-on that you download from the Blender extensions website, which is also like included inside the program. I'll let you look into that. And this one is also very useful because you can actually reduce poly count of meshes in a way that's not super destructive. I've had like sessions with Gummy, which is a member of the server, for those who don't know, where I sort of like was testing this with her, and she was having pretty good results on some of the meshes that she had. So I definitely recommend this add-on, Mesh Repair Tools, if you want to test out if it works on a very high poly mesh. It's not going to be like miraculous, but it's always good to sort of test it out. And the last one, once you've moved to UV maps, which might not be right now if you are still a beginner, but this extension is very, very useful. Blender UV editor is pretty good in my opinion. Some people think it's too basic. They had a update to it in one of the latest versions, I believe it was 5.0, where they made one of the most useful features of all time, where you can like select a vertex in the UV editor, and it also selects it in the other part, but while also still showing the wireframe. It's a whole thing. The context might sort of like go above your head because you maybe not accustomed to it, but like the UV editor has become much better because of that single like change that they made. So definitely look up to that. But this one extension, Mio3 UV, lets you do a whole bunch more stuff with your UV maps, such as like rotate them, change some, like smooth out some of the edges, re-unwraps things inside of a specific selection. You can like try to symmetricize your UVs based on a singular point on your UV editor. So really, really useful. And all of these are free, which is the case for all Blender add-ons, because Blender has a condition for people who make add-ons for Blender that it has to be sourced as a public, as an open source project. So basically the license is free, and people need to liberate the code if they want to make add-ons for Blender. Some people still like put some of their add-ons behind a fake paywall, but it's not really a paywall. It's just a wall that you pay if you want, but you can still choose to not pay and get the item for free. That's sort of like things that if you look into add-ons for Blender, you'll often have that as a requirement. But yeah, so these three are free. Obviously, this one is already shipped with Blender. And then a final recommendation is, if you want to learn Blender in a more general sense, then I definitely recommend this course by Blender Guru, which is an icon at this point. Like, it's an iconic tutorial because this person has been doing this tutorial over and over and over again for multiple versions of Blender, and it's pretty good to learn the basics. It's just a donut, but it really goes above and beyond to just tell you and how to use the program. And yeah, that would be the end of the workshop. I hope you like these 2 hours of content. That was quite a lot.